This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill.
Do not be afraid. We are now in control of what you hear.
1, 2, 3, testing.
A journey to the far reaches of knowledge and the unknown.
I can't believe I just saw that.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups.
One soul and preeminent power.
From extraterrestrials to exposing the truth.
I'll try to explain as much as I can.
You're listening to Planet X.
You're listening to Planet X.
Planet X.
This is Breaking the Matrix. I am Tony Topping.
This is Planet X. Planet X.
Breaking the Matrix, bringing you cutting-edge analysis and research so you don't have to. In our busy lives, when we're looking at the area of what we call conspiracy theory, a lot of people don't seem to understand that conspiracy theory isn't about conspiracy theory, it's actually about geopolitical analysis, research and intelligence. Our program Breaking the Matrix promises to deliver analysis and unique information about certain subjects and events chosen during the course of a typical week, so that you can listen and make an informed choice as to what is going on in the world around you. You need to be informed, you need to know, and this I hope will be an essential aid to your research. This is Breaking the Matrix. I am Tony Topping. It doesn't take a genius to grasp the American president doesn't really want to attack Syria. He doesn't want to topple Assad's regime. He doesn't have an alternative partner on the ground. Instead of shock and awe, this time the Pentagon is talking about surgical attack. The English-speaking empire, famous for its destructive inclinations, makes the potential attack on Syria sound like a cosmetic effort. No one in America, Britain, France or Israel is yet to suggest what is the goal of such an attack. What are the military initiatives? But the most crucial question is, what could be the positive outcome of such a military assault? I guess that we have to admit the Obama's administration is almost as confused as the situation on the ground is. It seems as if, in a relatively short time, the American administration has managed to fall into every possible trap. It is now affiliated with Al-Qaeda, assuming there is such a thing, Wahhabi warmongers, Salafi terrorists, nationalist and revolutionary forces, and America has tried to appease them all, but it obviously failed in every possible front. Dropping bombs on Syria is not going to provide the goods either. A surgical assault on Damascus is not going to appease America's Wahhabi partners. It may even achieve the opposite. I guess that the time is right for Obama to re-examine America's entire interventionist doctrine. But can he? Can an American leader think for himself? Can an American leader think for America? And can an American leader think at all? Or is he or her just reacting to lobby pressure? For more than a while, America's leadership has been in a clear state of detachment and alienation. Instead of looking after America's national interests like other Western democracies, it is torn between opposing lobby interests and marginal pressure groups. I guess that no superpower can maintain its hegemony under such circumstances. Accordingly, America, in its attempt to appease many conflicting lobbies, conveys a growing hesitance that has led into political impotence and a diplomatic standstill. Guess that the meaning of all is pretty devastating. Western democracies are becoming lethal instruments, easily manipulated by foreign interests and ethnic lobbies. We're basically taken into wars by our elected politicians because some other people expect us to do so. Yet when our leaders launch criminal wars, they actually incriminate not just themselves, but each and every one of us. The meaning of it is simple. Every act of attempted aggression by our democratically elected leaders must be subjected to public scrutiny and an open political discussion. Obama and Cameron should present the exact reasoning that led them to decide upon a military action. They should present a smoking gun that links Assad to the chemical attack on his people. It is not enough for us to learn that the White House has managed to convince itself that Assad is a war criminal. I guess the fact that Bush and Blair have never been brought to The Hague has something to do with our leaders' dismissal of international law. Yesterday evening, when it looked as if an American attack on Syria was imminent and just a matter of hours away, Britain managed to save the situation. It gave President Obama a rope. It allowed him a bit more time to reconsider his action. It may even be possible that Britain followed Obama's request. Someone in Britain must have realised that launching a wall while the UN team is still investigating would be hard, if not impossible, to justify afterwards. Clearly, the timing of the British decision to postpone the attack was crucial. Yet in order to save our civilization, we must form the necessary political instruments that would prevent our politicians from dragging us into foreign conflicts and world wars against our will and without consent. That was an article from Gillett Atman on gilad.co.uk, dated the 29th of August 2013.
Planet X. Strange goings on.
Let's be perfectly clear on one point. This was never about Syria. After David Cameron's government suffered its most humiliating defeat to date, with rebel MPs from every part of the political consensus uniting to prevent Britain charging into another interventionist war in the Middle East, here's what the Chancellor had to say. I think there will be a national soul-searching about our role in the world and whether Britain wants to play a big part in upholding the international system, be that a big open and trading nation that I'd like us to be, or whether we turn our back on that. I hope this doesn't become the moment where we turn our back on the world's problems. This will not mean more bloodshed. Not the use of chemical nerve agents as a weapon of war is utterly unacceptable. No, what concerns George Osborne and the government he represents is what this means for Britain. How will our refusal to join the United States in a proposed military assault on Syria, with or without UN backing, look to the rest of the world? Are we still going to feel big and important? Will our exports be affected? Somewhere in the suburbs of Syria, the bodies of the latest victims of sarin nerve gas are only lately cooled, stiff beyond rigor mortis, from inhaling a poison that causes every muscle in the body to clench up in death, suffocating the soul in its own flesh. And George Osborne is thinking about Britain's trading prospects? This was never about Syria, this was about us. Much to the charging of the Cabinet, the British public has remained doggedly against any prospect of war in Syria. Over 2/3 are opposed to military intervention, and for once, every scrapping faction of the Commissariat has taken up that consensus. Peter Hitchens agrees with Polly Tunneby. Norman Tebbit is briefly on the same side as Caroline Lucas. Osborne and Cameron find themselves part of a dwindling neocon consensus. Just them, their whipped ministerial colleagues, and Assad's former chum, Tony Blair, popping up in the papers like the ghost of Christmas past to explain why bombing Damascus is absolutely the right thing to do. If Cameron was following the advice of Vyacheslav von Perry, the Russian minister who wrote in 1905 that what needed to stem the tide of social unrest was a short, victorious war, he could not have been more wrong. We've seen where that goes. The American-led wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have not been short, and they've not been victorious. The United States still has the military muscle and also delusionary capacity to believe itself a capable world policeman. Britain is no longer labouring under that delusion. We have spent the past 5 years being told that the nation is too broke to afford basic welfare provision, let alone another drawn-out campaign to protect US interests in the Gulf. Very few of us want a war. Very few of us believe that a war will help the Syrian people. Turns out that the British public doesn't always have the collective recall of a damselfly in a gale. Something about a decade of war tends to jog the memory. The situation in Syria is bloody and frightening. In 2.5 years, tens of thousands of lives have been lost, hundreds of thousands of refugees have fled the country, and the war between Assad supporters and the disjointed forces of the Free Syrian Army will not be over quickly, with or without Anglo-American intervention. The impulse, the implication is that we have to do something, and somehow that something almost always involves cluster bombs, and not, for example, sending in shed loads of aid and medical supplies, or opening our borders to refugees. That's the sort of something that doesn't make a satisfying thwack when we unzip it on the table of the Cabinet war rooms. For the hawkish minority, the main line of reasoning, masterfully dissected by Richard Seymour at Lenin's tomb today, has been that the Assad regime must be punished, and that the British ought to be the ones doing the punishing. 6 of the best, trousers down. The old cliches are lifted out and polished for the mantelpiece of modern military hypocrisy. We're a plucky little island, punching above our weight on the world stage, standing up to bullies. We sort out the world problems. Our country, wrote Conservative MP Robert Halfon in a plea for intervention, has over many centuries stood tall against tyranny. Britain gave the world modern democracy and the rule of law. Well, no, it hasn't, and no, it didn't. Britain did, over many centuries, impose its own version of the rule of law on hundreds of millions of individuals in the global south, many of whom were massacred or functionally enslaved. Nor, over the decades that followed the disintegration of the British Empire, 2 little words that have faltered on the tongues of every Tory statesman in a fortnight of anxious warmongering. Have the British been consistent in our opposition to tyranny? We did not intervene during the Rwanda genocide. Margaret Thatcher took tea with Pinochet. The list of dictators with whom Britain has maintained cordial relations is long, and it is damning to anyone with the gall to argue that the people of Great Britain were ever cartographers of the moral high ground. The source is Laura Penny, and that's from the New Statesman magazine, a recent article, and it's called There Are Too Many Bodies, There are too many bodies buried on Britain's moral high ground. It's a super article, listeners, and we're going to have some more coming up soon.
Get in touch with Planet X. Call, text, email, find us on Facebook.
This article is Ellen Brown. Is watch out for in the area of financial research and conspiracy, dear listener, is of course Max Kaiser, and we'll be doing Breaking the Matrix. We'll want to do probably a full programme on this regarding confiscation schemes for money deposits in the UK. People are of course under the impression that in the UK their money is protected by a compensation scheme to, I think, the tune of £70,000. However, there has been a recent, in a few months back actually, Kaiser reported on a memo that was in circulation that indicated quite clearly that that was not the case. And Max Kaiser's article posted on March the 29th by him on maxkaiser.com is very interesting. It can happen here. The confiscation scheme plan for US and UK depositors. Confiscating the customer deposits in Cyprus banks, it seems, was not a one-off, according to Max. Desperate ideas of a few Eurozone Troika officials scrambling to salvage their balance sheets. A joint paper by the US Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and the Bank of England dated December the 12th, 2012 shows that these plans have been long in the making, that they originated with the G20 Financial Stability Board in Basel, Switzerland, discussed in an earlier report on maxkaiser.com, and that the result will be to deliver clear title to the banks of depositor funds. New Zealand has a similar directive discussed in Max's other articles, indicating that it isn't just an emergency measure for troubled Eurozone countries. New Zealand's Voxy reported on March the 19th, 2013 that the national government is pushing a Cyprus-style solution to bank failure in New Zealand, which will see small depositors lose some of their savings to fund big bank bailouts. Open Bank Resolution, OBR, is Finance Minister's Bill English's favoured option dealing with a major bank failure. If a bank fails under OBR, all depositors will have their savings reduced overnight to fund the bank's bailout. Shocking. Well, can they do it? Well, although few depositors realise it's legally, the bank owns the depositors' funds as soon as they are put in the bank. Our money becomes the bank's, and we become unsecured creditors holding IOUs or promises to pay. But until now, the bank has been obligated to pay the money back on demand in the form of cash under something called the FDIC BOE plan. Now, our IOUs will be converted into bank equity. The bank will get the money and we will get the stock in the bank. bank. With any luck, we may be able to sell the stock to someone else. But when and at what price? Most people keep a deposit account so they can have ready cash to pay the bills. Now, the 15-page FDIC BOA document is called Resolving Globally Active Systematically Important Financial Institutions. It begins by explaining that the 2008 banking crisis has made it clear that some other way besides taxpayer bailouts is needed to maintain financial stability, evidently anticipating that the next financial collapse will be on a grander scale than either the taxpayers or Congress is willing to underwrite, the author states. So an efficient path for returning sound operations of the GSFI, or should I say the GSIFI, to the private sector would be provided by exchanging or converting a sufficient amount of the unsecured debt from the original creditors of the failed company, which means, of course, the depositors, into equity or stock. In the US, the new equity will become capital in one or more newly formed operating entities. In the UK, the same approach could be used, or the equity could be used to recapitalise the failing financial company itself. So thus the highest layer of surviving bailed-in creditors would become the owners of the resolved firm in either country. The new equity holders would take on the corresponding risk of being shareholders in a financial institution. No exception is indicated for insured deposits in the US, meaning those under $250,000. The deposits we thought were protected by FDIC insurance, and it can hardly be an oversight since it is the FDIC that is issuing the directive. The FDIC is an insurance company funded by premiums paid by private banks. The directive, called a resolution process, that will be triggered in the event of the failure of an insurer. Now, the only mention of insured deposits is in connection with existing UK legislation, which the FDIC BOE directive goes on to say is inadequate, implying that it needs to be modified or overridden, which is interesting to say the least. If our IOUs are converted to bank stock, they will no longer be subject to insurance protection, but will be at risk and vulnerable to being wiped out, just as the Lehman Brothers shareholders were in 2008. This dire scenario could actually materialise, was underscored by Yves Smith in a March 19th post titled "When You Weren't Looking, Democratic Bank Stooges Launched Bills to Permit Bailouts, Deregulate Derivatives." And she writes, I find this very interesting as well, the source, by the way, is maxkaiser.com. In the US, depositors have actually been put in a worse position than Cyprus deposit holders, at least if they are at the big banks that play in the derivatives casino. The regulators have turned a blind eye as banks use their depositories to fund derivatives exposures. And as bad as that is, the depositors, unlike their Cypriot conferees, aren't even senior creditors. Remember Lehman, when the investment bank failed, unsecured creditors, and remember, depositors are unsecured creditors, I'll say again, depositors are unsecured creditors, got 8 cents on the dollar. One big reason was that derivatives counterparties require collateral for any exposures, meaning they are secured creditors. The 2005 bankruptcy reforms made derivatives counterparties senior to unsecured lenders. So one might wonder why the posting of collateral by a derivative counterparty at some percentage of full exposure makes the creditor secured, while the depositor who puts up the 100 cents on the dollar is unsecured. And she writes further, Lehman had only 2 itty-bitty banking subsidiaries and to my knowledge was not gathering retail deposits, but as readers may recall, Bank of America moved most of its derivatives from its Merrill Lynch operation to its depository in late 2011. Its depository is the arm of the bank that takes deposits, and at B of A, that means lots and lots of deposits. And the deposits are now subject to being wiped out by a major derivatives loss. And how bad could that be? Well, Smith quotes in Bloomberg, Bank of America's holding company held almost $75 trillion of derivatives at the end of June. That compares with JP Morgan's deposit-taking entity, JP Morgan Chase Bank NA, which contained 99% of New York-based firms' 79 trillion of national derivatives, or should I say notional derivatives, the OSC data shows. So 75 trillion and 79 trillion in derivatives. These two mega banks alone hold more in notional derivatives each than the entire global GDP. 70 trillion. The notional value of derivatives is not the same as cash at risk, but according to a crosspost on Smith's site, it says, by at least one estimate in 2010, there was a total of 12 trillion in cash tied up at risk in derivatives. 12 trillion is close to the US gross domestic product. And she goes on to say, remember the effect of the 2005 bankruptcy law revisions. Derivatives counterparties are first in line. They get to grab assets first and leave everyone else to scramble for crumbs. Lehman failed over a weekend after JP Morgan grabbed collateral. But it's even worse than that. During the savings and loan crisis, the FDIC did not have enough in deposit insurance receipts to pay for the Resolution Trust Corporation wind-down vehicle. It had to get more funding from Congress. This move paves the way for another TARP-style shakedown of taxpayers, this time to save depositors. Now, perhaps Congress had already been burned and is liable to balk a second time on this one. Section 716 of the Dodd-Frank Act specifically prohibits public support for speculative derivatives activities. And in the Eurozone, while the European Stability Mechanism committed Eurozone countries to bail out failed banks, they are apparently having second thoughts there as well. March the 25th, 2013, a Dutch finance minister, Jeroen, I can't pronounce the name, Gisbolem, I think that is pronounced, played a leading role in imposing the deposit confiscation plan on Cyprus. He told reporters that it would be the template for any future bank bailouts and that the aim is for ESM never to have been used. That explains the need for the FDIC BOE resolution. If the anticipating enabling legislation is passed, the FDIC will no longer need to protect depositor funds. It can just confiscate them, which is absolutely staggering once again what's going on. Interestingly enough, an FIDC confiscation of deposits to recapitalise the banks is far different from a simple tax on taxpayers to pay government expenses. The government step is at least arguably the people's steps. At least it is arguably the people's step. And since the government is there to provide services for the people, but when the banks get into trouble with their derivative schemes, they are not serving depositors who are not getting a cut of the profits. Taking depositor funds is simple theft. What should be done to raise FDIC insurance premiums and make the banks pay to keep their depositors whole, but premiums are already high. And the FDIC, like other government regulatory agencies, is subject to regulatory capture. Deposit insurance has failed, and so has the private banking system that has depended on it for the trust that makes banking work. The Cyprus haircut on depositors was called a wealth tax and was written off by commentators as deserved because much of the money in Cypriot accounts belongs to foreign oligarchs, tax dodgers and money launderers. But if the template is applied in the US, it will be a tax on the poor and middle class. Wealthy Americans don't keep most of their money in bank accounts. They keep it in the stock market, in real estate, in over-the-counter derivatives, in gold, silver and so forth. So are you safe? Then if your money is in gold and silver, apparently not. If it's stored in a safety deposit box in the bank, in America, Homeland Security has reportedly told banks that it has authority to seize the contents of safety deposit boxes without a warrant, when it's a matter of national security, which a major bank crisis no doubt will be. So the Swedish alternative was to nationalise the banks. That was rejected in 2009. Nationalise mega banks that fail is a very good article, which was in February 2009 called "Are Uninsured Bank Depositors in Danger?" and it was an article by Felix Salmon, and it was discussed in a newsletter by Asia-based investment strategist Christopher Wood. Now he wrote, It is amazing that Obama does not understand the political appeal of the nationalised option. Despite this latest setback, nationalisation of the banks is coming sooner or later because the realities of the situation will demand it. The result will be shareholders wiped out and bondholders forced to take debt for equity swaps, if not, hopefully, depositors. And on whether depositors could indeed be forced to become equity holders, Salmon commented, "It's worth remembering that depositors are unsecured creditors of any bank. Usually, indeed, they're by far the largest class of unsecured creditors." So President Obama acknowledged that bank nationalisation has worked in Sweden and that the course pursued by the US Fed had not worked in Japan, which wound up instead in a lost decade. But Obama opted for the Japanese approach because, according to Ed Harrison, Americans will not tolerate nationalisation. That was 4 years ago, when Americans realised that the alternative is to have their ready cash transformed into a bank stock of questionable markability. Moving failed mega banks into public sector may have more appeal, which it may. Ellen Brown is... This article by Ellen Brown, an attorney chairman of the Public Banking Institute and author of 11 books, including Web of Debt, The Shocking Truth About Our Money System, and How We Can Break Free. Her websites are webofdebt.com and ellenbrown.com. Now, in response to that article, a very interesting response on the Max Kaiser blog from Outrage from Italy. Outrage from Italy posted this very interesting piece of information to do that the blog, the slog, revealed that Santander just mailed all its customers a change in the terms and conditions. Of particular interest was this change for business customers with turnover of up to £250,000. 1b. Your money, any money, held for you in an account with Santander UK plc will be held in its capacity as a bank and not as a trustee. In accordance with FSA requirements, we are obliged to notify you that the client money rules on money do not apply to a banking consolidation directive in relation to deposits within the meaning of the BCD held by that institution. As a result, the money will not be held within the client money rules of the FSA. They've opted out. Very worrying. And as Outrage continues to say, so you can kiss your 85k guarantee goodbye if you're an SME and come under the smaller company's cover of the FCS. And by the way, for those of whom consider those stupid people from Spain, Italy, etc., the main media has a blackout in force. And there was at the time no Cyprus news on TV, radio. They have simply stated that Cyprus is a one-off situation and that their money is totally safe. It obviously isn't, listeners. Your money is not safe with what's going on, and Breaking the Matrix intends to bring you more info on this subject. Taking you beyond the frontiers of high strangeness, at St Anne's-on-Sea, at the Community Centre, St Albans Road, on the 21st of September 2013, a psychic remote viewing workshop. By popular request, a one-day course on psychic remote viewing based on the techniques of the spy agencies of the Cold War is presented for you. Participants conduct an actual target session and deeply explore the techniques pioneered by the major players in remote viewing. The day includes looking at that rare information pioneered by Russian remote viewers in understanding the cosmos. Tony Topping has nearly 30 years of knowledge in dealing with UFOs and psychic espionage. He has appeared for major broadcasters from ITV to Channel 5 News. And adding further fascination to events, our special guest will be taking attendees into the fascinating world of the human aura and first steps into stereo viewing, which peers into the spiritual realm of the self using photographic technology. All attendees will receive a CD-ROM of information packed with documents on remote viewing and aura research. It's unbeatable value at a cost of £30, including refreshments. Concessions for low incomes are available. Just email Tony, opsufo@hotmail.com. Tickets are available from psychicrvevent.eventbrite.co.uk. That is psychicrvevent.eventbrite, the word bright, spelt BRITE.co.uk. Come and join us for a fantastic day. The David Icke newsletter goes out on Sundays, and he has been a supporter of planetxlive.co.uk. If you haven't had a chance to read his newsletter, he has some interesting thoughts regarding Tony Blair, and I'd like to read them to you as well in his newsletter, and this is what he had to say. How appropriate that Tony Blair, for whom the history books will be devastating, should campaign this week for military intervention in Syria by the satanic criminals that created him, control him, and have made him a very rich man for services rendered. If anyone personifies the sleazy crooks, liars, narcissists, psychopaths and war criminals that drive world events and direct human society, it is mendacity man Tony Blair. As I have said many times, if there is even ever a half-truth in a Blair speech, it is a typing error. It takes cognitive dissonance to stratospheric levels for a man who lied so outrageously in league with Boy Bush to kill and maim millions in Iraq to now lecture the world on the need for a repeat 10 years later in Syria. For me, it is a form of mental illness, because that is what arrogance becomes when it reaches the clinical stage that we see with Anthony Charles Linton Blair, who is so deep in the cesspit that he surely needs an air tank, never mind a snorkel. He has rarely seen a people that he did not want to bomb. Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Iran and now Syria. He has ordered or supported attacks on all of them. But then, given that he is an oh-so-willing pawn of the global death cult, why would it be any different? The depths of his mass murder and clinical depravity can be seen in the cult awarding him a peace medal, just as it did with war criminal Obama, thanks to the ludicrous Nobel Peace Prize named after a man who made his fortune making weapons of war. But then Tony Blair, who has destroyed the lives of millions in the Middle East, is now the Middle East peace envoy for the US, Russia, the EU and United Nations. David Icke considers that this is taking the piss. The world is inverted because its leaders are perverted. Tony Blair, I rest my case. An article by David Icke. His newsletter goes out on Sunday. And interestingly enough, with David Icke, there's another thing that's going on there. We wonder if David can help you, if we can help David. He's found the studios, he's secured a London studio, and a Los Angeles studio is in his sights. And any builders, decorators or electricians who can contribute to creating the People's Voice studio or its production office, in fact anyone who can help him secure furniture, computers and editing technology at the best possible price, please contact studio@thepeoplesvoice.tv. You're listening to Breaking the Matrix. This is Planet X. MP George Galloway has launched a new project on Kickstarter called The Killing of Tony Blair by George Galloway MP. It's a very interesting project. Some people make a living, others make a killing. An exclusive new documentary on Tony Blair which will break unexplored ground. He says, I'm making the definitive documentary about the Blair years of war and plunder, death and destruction, corruption and disillusion. Tony Blair killed the Labour Party as we knew it. He and George W. Bush helped kill 1 million people in disastrous wars, and Blair is currently making a financial killing out of both. 2003, I was expelled from the Labour Party over my outspoken opposition to Bush and Blair's war in Iraq. I promised that until the last day of my life I would go on fighting to put Tony Blair on trial, a real trial in The Hague, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. This documentary, the mothers of all documentaries, will expose Blair's crimes. This documentary will not be another sterile chronicle of the Blair years. I witnessed his mendacity firsthand, and I'm able to offer you the inside story. I will pull no punches in going toe-to-toe with those in the upper echelons of New Labour. The likes of Peter Mandelson and Alistair Campbell are all in my sights, and so are the big business bankers he consults for. There is no doubt that the debates will be heated, but from that heat will come light. I need your help to launch this film. We are trying to raise 50,000 here on this site. This target is the absolute bare minimum we need to complete the research and filming. In total, we will need more than twice that amount to purchase further archive materials, dispute and market the documentary. We are confident that a successful Kickstarter campaign will empower us to match funds from other sources. This is an all-or-nothing platform. If we don't raise the full 50,000 in just 40 days, no money changes hands. I hope you will want to be part of this. You can be the difference to help make history, stop Blair in his tracks, halt his profiteering, and bring to him some kind of justice. It is an ambitious project, but it's not beyond us. And that is George Galloway MP on Kickstarter, The Killing of Tony Blair.
X marks the spot. This is Planet X.
It's not a crime unless you get caught is a very interesting article by Malcolm Massey that was written in July the 23rd, 2013 at the UK column. It has been claimed, following startling new figures, that crime rates have plummeted in the Western world. Robberies, car thefts and murders are all falling substantially, and according to the data, in some cases, crime has practically vanished. Police surveys and victim surveys all purport that crime against a person and against property has fallen, even though the same newspaper reported only 7 days ago, this article dated July, that half of crimes are not being investigated because police focus on cases that are a priority to them and not their victims. It was also reported in May of this year that police have been ordered to slant crime, as officers are encouraged to massage crime figures. It has been suggested that officers are afraid to speak out in fear of losing their jobs. If we look at the trends in reported crime and recorded crime, it is evident that there is a huge discrepancy. These reports suggest that the crime rates are falling because people are not recording them with the police, perhaps due to a lack of confidence following a number of high-profile police failures, such as the Hillsborough cover-up and failed Stephen Lawrence investigation, and that police are not recording the crimes and thus not investigating them. Been suggested that crime rates are falling because we are returning to a national equilibrium following the World War II baby boom, which resulted in a swelling of the 16 to 24 age bracket, of whom commit the majority of crimes. We are now entering a time where those people are aging, and supposedly there are fewer 16 to 24-year-olds in Britain. Whilst the population may be living longer, women are choosing to have children at a later age too, and, whilst there may be some truth in this statement, there are still more than 6.6 million 16 to 24-year-olds in Britain. Deputy Assistant Commissioner for London's Met Police Mark Simmons pointed out that the city is home to an increasing number of 18 to 24-year-old men, yet offences continue to fall. Others have argued that the expanding prison population is evidence of fewer criminals on the streets, hence lower crime rates. However, this does not stack up either, since whilst prison populations have increased by more than 40,000 over the last 13 years, the UK's population has grown by 5 million. This would only suggest that prison populations grow with the national population. It is also interesting to note that other countries which have reduced the number of prisoners behind bars have still seen a fall in crime. There was even the suggestion that social changes have meant that young people in many wealthy countries are likely to continue to live with their parents and remain in higher education, all of which results in a generally better behaved generation, though there is not evidence put forward that would support this statement. What is surely meant by social changes is austerity. Austerity is what is causing younger generations to stay at home longer, and when we compare ourselves to other wealthy nations that have falling crime rates, it is clear to see that all such countries are being squeezed by austerity, which results in an underfunded police service. Of course, all reports have missed the inconvenient truth that many high-ranking crimes, such as banking fraud and treason, as well as fraud and malfeasance in government, are being ignored by the police, despite numerous complaints being made throughout the country, adding to the lack of confidence in police and thus a lack of reporting crimes. This is Breaking the Matrix. Austin Wright from Politico.com reports that a US attack on Syria could translate into big bucks for defence giant Raytheon, which makes the Tomahawk cruise missile that is said to be President Barack Obama's weapon of choice. Reports that the White House is planning an attack to punish Damascus for the use of chemical weapons sent Raytheon's stock price to a 52-week high this week and have reawakened come rumblings in Congress that the military doesn't buy enough Tomahawks. There are many of us who have been concerned for years about maintaining our missile capabilities, said Republican Rob Bishop of Utah, a member of the House of Armed Services Committee. On paper, the Pentagon buys 196 Tomahawk missiles a year, considered the minimum sustaining rate, or just enough to maintain the supply chain. But the Navy, which did not respond to a request for comment, has had to ramp up production after firing hundreds of Tomahawks during Libya's 2011 civil war. Accounting for the extra orders, Raytheon has delivered 252 missiles this fiscal year and 361 last fiscal year, and any Tomahawks fired at Syria would almost certainly represent a future increase in orders for the missiles, which can go for about 1 million apiece. There's a number that has to be available, said one defence lobbyist. If they fall below that number, they'll replace them. Bishop is worried about the fledgling supply chain for solid rocket motors, with guided missile programs bringing a lot of money to his district. Demand for the motors that are used to launch Tomahawk missiles from warships and submarines has fallen in recent years because of cuts to US space and missile programs. For Raytheon, the big question is whether a starring role for the Tomahawk in Syria will lead to a permanent increase in orders for the missiles, which have become a go-to weapon in recent conflicts because of their ability to penetrate sophisticated air defense systems without risking US lives. Cruise missiles are heavily used, particularly so often at the start of any conflict, as sort of the way to open the door, Bishop said. When you reduce funding or diminish demand in many of these programs, you really endanger the capability to maintain this missile capability at all. In its budget submission for fiscal 2013, the White House requested 196 Tomahawks for a total program cost of $320 million. It's requesting the same amount next fiscal year for a cost of $325 million. The increase in price, defence watchers say, is the result of several factors: inflation, rising fuel costs, and a shrinking supply chain. The Navy has also brought extra missiles to replenish its inventories following the civil war in Libya, awarding Raytheon 2 Tomahawk contracts last year, one for 361 missiles and the other for 252, with the work for the second contract expected to be completed by August 2015. The increased orders were a boon for Raytheon, which saw an increase in net Tomahawk sales of $32 million during the second quarter of the year, compared with the same period last year, according to its latest filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission. That was source Politico.com.
Get in touch with Planet X. Call, text, email. Find us on Facebook. From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups, this is Planet X.
Did you like the first episode of Breaking the Matrix? There's always room for improvement. We're always going to be looking for new material. Would you like to be interviewed by Breaking the Matrix? We specialise in financial conspiracy, and the issues that matter. If you'd like that, contact me, Tony, opsufo@hotmail.com. I am Tony Topping. This is Planet X. You're listening to Breaking the Matrix. That's all we have time for. Until next week.
You're listening to Planet X. Planet X, the biggest paranormal show on radio.
We're basically taken into wars by our elected politicians because some other people expect us to do so. Yet when our leaders launch criminal wars, they actually incriminate not just themselves, but each and every one of us. The meaning of it is simple. Every act of attempted aggression by our democratically elected leaders must be subjected to public scrutiny and an open political discussion. Obama and Cameron should present the exact reasoning that led them to decide upon a military action. They should present a smoking gun that links Assad to the chemical attack on his people. It is not enough for us to learn that the White House has managed to convince itself that Assad is a war criminal. I guess the fact that Bush and Blair have never been brought to The Hague has something to do with our leaders' dismissal of international law. Yesterday evening, when it looked as if an American attack on Syria was imminent and just a matter of hours away, Britain managed to save the situation. It may even achieve the opposite. I guess that the time is right for Obama to re-examine America's entire interventionist doctrine. But can he? Can an American leader think for himself? Can an American leader think for America? And can an American leader think at all? Or is he or her just reacting to lobby pressure? For more than a while, America's leadership has been in a clear state of detachment and alienation. Instead of looking after America's national interests like other Western democracies, it is torn between opposing lobby interests and marginal pressure groups. I guess that no superpower can maintain its hegemony under such circumstances. Accordingly, America, in its attempt to appease many conflicting lobbies, conveys a growing hesitance that has led into political impotence and a diplomatic standstill. Guess that the meaning of all is pretty devastating. Western democracies are becoming lethal instruments, easily manipulated by foreign interests and ethnic lobbies.
This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill.
Do not be afraid. We are now in control of what you hear.
1, 2, 3, testing.
A journey to the far reaches of knowledge and the unknown.
I can't believe I just saw that.
From aliens to angels, conspiracies to cover-ups.
One soul and preeminent power.
From extraterrestrials to exposing the truth.
I'll try to explain as much as I can.
You're listening to Planet X.
You're listening to Planet X.
Planet X.
This is Breaking the Matrix. I am Tony Topping.
This is Planet X. Planet X.
Breaking the Matrix, bringing you cutting-edge analysis and research so you don't have to. In our busy lives, when we're looking at the area of what we call conspiracy theory, a lot of people don't seem to understand that conspiracy theory isn't about conspiracy theory, it's actually about geopolitical analysis, research and intelligence. Our program Breaking the Matrix promises to deliver analysis and unique information about certain subjects and events chosen during the course of a typical week, so that you can listen and make an informed choice as to what is going on in the world around you. You need to be informed, you need to know, and this I hope will be an essential aid to your research. This is Breaking the Matrix. I am Tony Topping. It doesn't take a genius to grasp the American president doesn't really want to attack Syria. He doesn't want to topple Assad's regime. He doesn't have an alternative partner on the ground. Instead of shock and awe, this time the Pentagon is talking about surgical attack. The English-speaking empire, famous for its destructive inclinations, makes the potential attack on Syria sound like a cosmetic effort. No one in America, Britain, France or Israel is yet to suggest what is the goal of such an attack. What are the military initiatives? But the most crucial question is, what could be the positive outcome of such a military assault? I guess that we have to admit the Obama's administration is almost as confused as the situation on the ground is. It seems as if, in a relatively short time, the American administration has managed to fall into every possible trap. It is now affiliated with Al-Qaeda, assuming there is such a thing, Wahhabi warmongers, Salafi terrorists, nationalist and revolutionary forces, and America has tried to appease them all, but it obviously failed in every possible front. Dropping bombs on Syria is not going to provide the goods either. A surgical assault on Damascus is not going to appease America's Wahhabi partners.